So last week, no, 2 weeks ago, we had Senior Joe Stango speak to us in a community conversation about bridging the divide. And today we have the Junior Joe Stango to speak to us about the life and work of MLK as well.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Not only for having me speak, I'm very honored to be speaking here, but also because this opportunity allowed me to become reacquainted. To become reacquainted with Martin Luther King's work. And finally, thank you all for actually coming out, right? We're here today to celebrate and honor the work and ideas of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., something that I believe is truly worthy of the minor sacrifice of meeting today outside in the snow. But by way of introductions, my name's Joseph Stango. I use he, him pronouns. I work for an organization committed to ending the HIV epidemic in the United States. It is still ongoing. It is frankly thriving in the South, and there's much work to be done on behalf of the communities that the Reverend Doctor was also fighting on behalf of. And especially since we've got a nice core group here huddling together to stay a little warm. I want us to get a little bit warmer. I don't want to just be speaking myself, but I think I'm going to bring you all into the conversation. And I'm going to be doing that by starting not with some of King's work, King's writings, which I do plan to quote quite a bit, but by starting with a question. You know, so much of the racial justice work, the civil rights work, started because many people said, I cannot live in concert with myself, in harmony with myself, with the many injustices happening in the world. I must challenge that. And that challenge begins with asking questions about society, asking questions about each other, so that we can get a clear picture of what is happening, what power we have to change things, and then actually devising plans to work with other people and to make those changes a reality. So my question is this: in a dishonorable world, are the honorable at a disadvantage? And I welcome thoughts. I welcome even just quick glimmers before I jump in with the thought.
I don't think honor puts you at a disadvantage. I think that honor actually puts you one step out in front, because you don't have to justify your motives when you're acting in an honorable way. So when we look at especially our political landscape today, when people look back and say, what was the justification for doing this? I think an honorable person has an easier time of justifying how they're behaving than some others.
That's a great start. I really like that. Thank you. Yeah.
But dishonorable gets more publicity. It's easier to make news with dishonorable.
Gets more clicks.
Squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Well, I'd also say it depends on the rules. To have rules that can be enforced, and the honorable could have an advantage.
Yep.
And if you don't have rules that are fair or that are enforced, then I'd have to go and say this dishonorable person has the advantage.
Yeah. That's a key addition, I think. We have three really nice ideas here. A real moral perspective saying, I am in harmony with myself, with my conscience, which I think is a key feature to what King did and taught. And the challenge of working with and among the dishonorable, we'll call them, because it is flashier, right? And it could be that if the dishonorable do have power, that they can get away with things. As I'll say later, I think we see happening quite a bit right now as the reality. When I first heard this question, it was presented to me and a cohort of people at a leadership retreat. And it troubled me a little bit for a number of the reasons that you both presented, to say, in a dishonorable world, first of all, are the honorable after the same things as the dishonorable? And starting from that point, I said maybe they're not at a disadvantage because they're after different things in this world. But the very fact that they're after different things means that in a dishonorable world, where potentially dishonorable people are running the world, they're in danger. And they're in danger particularly because they pose danger to the powerful. They're dangerous because their example is testament that there can be another way to live one's life. To live one's life as an individual, but also to live as an individual in a community. And so they're consistently attacked. We see it in the press, people's names being slandered. We see decent people being attacked physically, having harm done to themselves. And we see them shut out of society, as we have seen our black neighbors and friends experience throughout the history of this country and before. And that's where I'm going to bring the Reverend Doctor into play here. Because you see, in 1968, just a few months before he was killed in Memphis, Tennessee, a Harris poll reported that 75% of Americans made it known that they disapproved of the Reverend Doctor. They disapproved of the man, of his ideas, and of his actions and what he taught others to go out and do in the world. Now, depending on your point of view, it could have been any number of things. To black folks at the time, he was too slow. They had faced hundreds of years of oppression, of what King himself called authoritarianism against a minority. He was too slow, and his call for nonviolence old-fashioned. For the white folks in 1968, particularly those in power, he was too radical, especially as he bound together the fights for racial and economic justice. Or, as he did at the close of 1967 and 1968 more so, he made plain to the American public, a few years before it was fashionable, the evils our government forced our nation's youth to commit and to endure in Vietnam. In the years since his death, his reputation has quite changed. I think in schools, we're taught the tremendous power that he had in transforming the public. We were taught about the civil rights legislation that was passed and the integration of American society. We were taught about the push to bring black folks into their civic duty of voting and how that was both challenging to make happen and how it was a long-fought win. Both for the people who were denied their right to vote, but for the country at large. To the point where in 2011, when King's Memorial was opened in Washington, D.C., he had a 90% favorability rating in this country. And I would argue therein lies some of the challenge, right, of time and memory, especially when we get farther removed from the events. We remember the nice things. We remember the things that make us feel good. We remember the dream that we want to keep dreaming, but we do not remember that a dream without a plan is fantasy. And so I do fear that if many people today were confronted by King's words, by King's deeds,
Can you check your phone to see if it's working?
like this person behind me maybe, that 90% approval rating will plummet. Although I pray that it would not plummet as low as it once was. At this point, I do want to bring some of King's own words into our group here. Because it is important that we dig into what he said and what he did so that we can determine for ourselves, are these methods those that we should engage in our ongoing fights to realize justice, to practice justice ourselves, for ourselves, and for our communities. To begin with, in his letter from Birmingham jail, which he wrote in 1963 after being arrested for sitting at a lunch counter, a whites-only lunch counter, he writes to other clergy who are saying, I agree with the message, I agree with the pursuit of justice, but slow down. Don't cause the trouble. Why are you going outside of your native Atlanta to Birmingham? Let Birmingham deal with Birmingham's issues and stay in Atlanta. King said, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. The reality is that even though we are here in suburban Connecticut, we are connected to what's happening out in Minneapolis, what's happening out in Chicago and Los Angeles, in Portland, Oregon, in Memphis, where the National Guard was once again deployed against its own people. And so it is right and proper that we continue to meet here and challenge the status quo that continues to hold some of our neighbors in an impossible bind of being viewed as less than, of being viewed as not capable or not deserving of full participation in our world. And so King not only stopped in Birmingham, but he went down to Selma. And when he made that all-important connection that racial justice is not, it's not happening in its own silo, that it is intimately connected to the economic injustice, that people did not have jobs that paid them enough to live with dignity, that wealth disparity, especially as the war machine was ramping up, as the economic disparity increased, he attempted to make that connection and bring folks from beyond the South. He went to Chicago to spread his message of the interrelatedness of all of our action in the face of injustice. And even still, people said, King, this isn't your fight. And your methods are wrong. You're breaking laws. How can you break laws if you want to defend justice and the rule of law? King replied to that point by saying, in any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps that we have to remember. The first is the collection of facts to determine whether injustices are alive. The second is an attempt at negotiation with those leaders who are continuing to perpetuate those injustices. The third is self-purification. What are the ways that I'm continuing to perpetuate these injustices? What are the ways that I'm, by my action or inaction, by my deeds, by my words or my silences, allowing my neighbors, allowing fellow countrymen to live lives from which their dignity has been taken. And finally, the fourth is direct action. Now, direct action can take many forms. One of the most visible is certainly a rally like this, whether we have a close little group of folks or we're 100,000 strong, coming together and meeting and pushing these issues in the public, pushing the visibility so that justice has the rightful place in the media. There are also opportunities for economic boycott, which was particularly effective in the South, right? There were organized programs to stop shopping from businesses that continue to perpetuate these injustices. And economically, these places hurt until we reopened the negotiating table, right? That was an effective tool at the time. An unpopular tool for business leaders, for community leaders, but for the average folk. But for that period of time where we hurt, maybe we didn't go to the shop that we wanted to go to, that we like to go to, that small sacrifice pushed the needle to ensure that all of us could unite in community together. Now that was an earlier thing, 1963. That was pre-Nobel Prize. After the Nobel Prize that he won in 1964, King went on to make the bigger connections, particularly among the as he worked with more poor folks across the country, and understand that they're not lazy, they're not there because they don't work hard enough. They're often there because the systems at play work to maintain an underclass of people who do the menial work that doesn't get the credit that it deserves as essential to our lives. You know, this is something we heard echoed during COVID, when we had essential workers going to work, risking themselves, their lives, their families' lives by doing so, and being remunerated with deflated wages and tremendous stress and the trauma of seeing their neighbors fall to awful sickness. King realized that just by speaking to one another, just by holding dialogue, and just by keeping the movement for justice siloed into the different buckets of racial justice, economic justice, health justice, justice between the sexes, among the sexes and genders. That approach maintains isolation between individuals. It does not foster that community, that sacred community that he was after. And so in a speech, his final speech that he gives to the Southern Coalition, his Baptist preachers, where do we go from here? He says a basic challenge to our movement from here on out is to discover how to organize our strength in terms of economic and political power. this was a challenge for many preachers at the time, many pastors, because as King says, we have become used to thinking that power is the antithesis to love. And because the Christian teaching pushes us to love our neighbor, it has pushed Christians, good Christians, to abdicate power. King reminded them in his speech that power properly understood is nothing but the ability to achieve purpose. It is the strength required to bring about social, political, and economic change. And furthermore, there is nothing wrong with power if power is used correctly. What is needed at this time is the realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. In fact, it is precisely this collision of immoral power with powerless morality which constitutes the major crisis of our time. He said that in 1968, and I very well might argue that still, in 2026, we are faced with the same crisis. I realize I'm in getting to this point, I'm working from an assumption here that that what King said, did, and advocated are all honorable things to pursue. And I think the very fact that we're out here, it's cold, it's snowing, we're all probably on the same page there, but that's not necessarily the case in this country. Where the honorable thing may be perceived as doing what folks might consider to be their personal responsibility in the world. And the fact is that phrase could be many things. It could genuinely mean I'm going to do what I can for myself, for my family, for my community. Unfortunately, though, when I'm confronted with that phrase, it's often from people who might be called NIMBYs, not in my backyard, to say, well, I'm responsible for what is in the four corners of my property. Good luck to you. You have a personal responsibility to deal with that. And if you don't, then there's no use for you here. And that's, I think, a trap. There are many ways that our society tries to isolate us. We're confronted with more and more of them each day, especially as our little pocket computers, our telephones, become more advanced and are now equipped with what I'm told is called intelligence. It's artificial. I don't know how smart it is yet, or how smart it will make us, but I do think it is effectively separating us more and more. King, in my reacquaintance in the past week, I haven't found a specific passage where he talks about what is an honorable act or what it is to be honorable. But in many of his other passages, I do think he gets at it obliquely. In another of his speech from the winter of 1968, called The Drum Major Instinct, he talks about that need we all have to have distinction, to be first. Now, in the reckless and the abusive, the folks with power without love, that could turn into what he calls the greatest sin, of racial oppression. Putting down another simply because I must be first. I consider myself better than. But he said it's that same impulse that can actually fuel the fight for justice to fan the flames of good work and good people. And he did it like Jesus, through parable. In fact, he pulls from the Bible when two of Jesus' disciples went to Jesus and said, "We know that you are the King of Kings and that you will institute a kingdom on this earth. And when you do that, we want to be by your right and left hand." Jesus responded in King's formulation of the story, "Oh, I see you want to be first. You want to be great. You want to be important. You want to be significant. Well, you ought to be. If you're going to be my disciple, you must be." But Jesus reordered their priorities here. And he said, don't give up this instinct. It's a good instinct if you use it right. It's a good instinct if you don't distort it and pervert it. Don't give it up. Keep feeling the need for being important. Keep feeling the need for being first. But I want you to be first in love. I want you to be first in moral excellence. I want you to be first in generosity. That's what I want you to do. And so from this passage and from many other passages, King reminds us that the honorable thing to do, the right thing to do, is to act on behalf of those who cannot act for themselves. To continue serving others even when you feel that you are owed something for who and what you are. And it's at this point that I want to say, going back to the idea of responsibility, not just the responsibility for what I consider my personal obligations, my desires for myself in the world or for my family. But to think of it bigger and to think of it even more simply. You know, responsibility is kind of a funny word. Because at its most basic, it's responsibility. Which for me says, if you hear a call for help and you have the ability to respond, then you must. Bringing King to today, and with that thought in mind, it often feels like you may not have power to change things, especially when there are bad actors manipulating the system towards their own ends, towards the ends that betray the American people at large. The reality is that we still have much more than what we feel, and there are things that we can do that I would say that we have a responsibility to do, all of which are in accordance with King's prescription. So to begin with, following King, well, where do we go from here? He says, first we must know and determine where we are. And it's bleak. I wake up many days with a heart heavy with anger. Right now my understanding is that there are 6 times the number of ICE agents in the Twin Cities than there are local police, with officers being told by no less than the President, the Vice President, and the Secretary of State, as well as the Secretary of Homeland Security, that they have immunity in their actions, which legally is not true. Not only that, but in October of 2025, ProPublica reported that more than 170 U.S. citizens have been held by ICE in what Tom Homan called collateral arrests of many American citizens. Additionally, the Justice Department has opened inquiries into Minnesota's governor and the mayor of Minneapolis. And let's also not forget that it was just last June that a Minnesota state legislator and her husband were assassinated, and another legislator and his wife were shot and injured. Additionally, we have a stock market that continues to rely on a few tech companies passing around the same $20 bill and calling it growth and valuation. We see now foreign commitments from a president who said he was an isolationist. We're in Venezuela for oil, as the president has said. Something it even seems that oil executives are wary of. And the money that's being brought in from the sale of that oil is being stored in foreign bank accounts in Qatar. We're repeatedly threatening our NATO allies to obtain the rare earth minerals in Greenland, something that, by the way, a number of America's billionaire class have already begun investing in. The New Republic says that Cobalt Metals, a mining outfit, helping lead Greenland's, quote, modern gold rush, has seen investments from figures like Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and the hedge funds like Andreessen Horowitz. Another company eyeing Greenland is Critical Metal Corp, which is backed by the same hedge fund that Howard Lutnick, now Trump's Commerce Secretary, spent years running. Indeed, the investors behind Critical Metal Corp have significant overlap with those investors behind Trump Media, creating what Robert Weissman, who helps run the pro-transparency group Public Citizens, called a circle of grift. Beyond that, we're facing the collapse of truth and science and the connection between self and community. Not only in the dismantling of HHS that we're seeing, but the labeling of decent, public-spirited scientific efforts being labeled radical theories. My own work and the work of my colleagues early last year was taken down from government websites stating that it was work that promoted radical gender ideology and that the Trump administration believes it is false. Again, not to harp on the AI, but we're already seeing with things like Grok on X, formerly Twitter, how it has been producing child sex assault images and spreading them all across the platform, spreading lies and disinformation. We see people already succumbing to mental psychosis as a result of their relationships with artificial intelligence. And it seems that the tech industry is just digging their heels deeper into the ethos of moving fast and breaking things. The gap between the average workers and corporations' top brass continues to grow, with more Americans struggling to afford basic necessities. While if you turn on the TV, we're getting advertisements telling us to gamble our money on everything now, from groups like Kalshi. And finally, at least for this list, I would be remiss if I didn't say that our trans community and our non-binary community, especially our black trans folk, continue to be wrongfully demonized, demoralized, and attacked from all angles. despite the tremendous personal examples the community sets for all of us in terms of courage and resilience, and despite the many statements, research, and publications from very qualified doctors saying that the medical and behavioral therapies not only are broadly safe, but that they help many people flourish in ways that they weren't before. That's where we are. And again, it may seem like, what power do we have to tip the needle, to change things? But the reality again is, my friends, we have much more power than it may feel. And so let's apply King's method here. Let's look at the opportunity for protests. Well, we know that there are many that continue to happen across the country with the success of the No Kings protests and the Melt Ice protests, all of which are nonviolent, the organizers of which insist upon the participants to remain nonviolent. And so I would say, if you hear of those opportunities, go join. One more body means another citizen out in the streets letting this government know that they cannot run roughshod over our Constitution and over the spirit of the American people. Then there are boycotts and economic investment. For almost a year now, there's been an ongoing boycott of Target because they decided early in Trump's second term to comply in advance with the anti-DEI orders, and they canceled their investments in black communities. Well, the same people that stood up in the 60s, the NAACP, black preachers, black community at large, and many of their allies said no. And Target has felt the boycott. If you do join a boycott, consider putting that money somewhere else, like a mutual aid network. If you're thinking about Milwaukee, there are opportunities with the Minnesota Immigrant Rights Action Committee, the Immigrant Defense Network, and the Community Aid Network. And then continue to think about how we might educate ourselves and our friends. Bring up King, talk about it, have a conversation. And always remind yourself that betraying my conscience, betraying our conscience, is no way to practice justice. And the reality is, in the face of all of these things, we must remember that honorable action means accepting the sacrifice for the public good. Thank you all. I'm very grateful to be here today, and I'm very grateful for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. May we all carry the message of the Reverend Dr. King in our actions and our deeds.
All right.